More, but
I wouldn't be surprised if a couple stroll in.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so this week, hello, good evening. This week, we are going to talk about, as you see in the handout, Rebecca and Isaac, Rivka and Yitzchak. Last week, we talked about Sarah and Abraham. And although we still have a lot of sources for this week, Sarah and Abraham, if you remember, was kind of like a breakneck, I thought, like class, because we started in chapter 11 and we went all the way, I think, to chapter 23, is one class. Rebecca and Yitzchak, Rebecca and Isaac, they have a much smaller screen time or stage time, whatever, in the Bible. They go from about, I would include chapter 24 till chapter 27. And that's really like pretty much their whole story. So much less ground to cover in that regard. Okay, so we're going to start in chapter 24. We're not going to really read through it. We're just going to read through a little bit at the end, because chapter 24, so if you're looking in this Tanakh, is on page 33, begins. Chapter 24, which if you look is a very long chapter, 66 verse 67.
I go from 31 to 34. I guess I'm missing some pages.
Well, that's all right. You could just stay on 34. Chapter 24 is about the search for a wife for Isaac. Right? Abraham is old and he decides it's time. He sends his servant, who we assume is Eliezer, even though not named in this chapter. We assume that it's Eliezer because he's mentioned previously as Abraham's very loyal servant. You okay?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, so, and then there's this very long chapter where he goes to, and he makes kind of a deal with himself, or with God, that the woman who offers him water and then offers to water his camels as well, that's going to show him, I assume, strength of good character, and that's the person, the woman that he's going to choose. Abraham makes him swear that he will not bring Isaac to this land. So let me back up for a second. So the instructions are, Abraham says to his servant, you should go get a wife for my son Yitzchak to marry. You cannot take a wife from where we live in Eretz Canaan. You have to go back to where I'm from and get a woman from there, which is in itself an interesting question. Why did he do that? And you cannot in any circumstances bring Yitzchak with you. Even if the woman says, I won't come, don't then go grab Yitzchak, bring him to meet the woman and see if she'll come then, right? He can't go, it just has to be you. So he does that. And then the chapter is very long because then the servant, when he meets with Rivka's family, there's a whole repeat where he repeats what happened in real time. He then retells it to Rivka's family. That's not for our purposes tonight. There's lots of interesting things about how he retells it, and he doesn't retell it exactly in the same way. But I want to focus a little bit on some of the verses in this chapter. So the first thing I want to look at is just where you see Rivka, because that's who we're focusing on tonight, comes on the scene. So if you look at page 34, right, starting in verse 15. So that little paragraph there, verses 15 to 20 on page 34, that's when Rebecca comes out. And we see that she does exactly what the servant was hoping for. In verse 17, the servant ran toward her and said, please let me sip a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and she quickly lowered her jar upon her hand and let him drink. And when she had let him drink his fill, she said, I will also draw up for your camels until they finish drinking. Quickly emptying her jar into the trough, thank you. She ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels. Now, I think this actually sounds better in Hebrew, because in Hebrew, you can see, even though you can see it in English as well, but there's a lot of verbs that kind of stick out in the Hebrew. Then you see, here's Rivka. And if I said, what kind of traits would you, if I said right now, just from reading these couple of verses, what do you know about Rivka?
She's strong.
I mean, she's physically strong.
Yes, she probably is physically strong, right?
Because water is heavy, and to
Yes,
go back and forth
right.
to go from the
We
well.
always discuss that with my students, right? And it's not in those like plastic water bottles, you assume, right? It's in like clay, I always think. Okay, remember you said?
She's generous and quick to act.
Right, she's generous, she's quick to act, and she's not really like shy, it seems. It seems she's kind of outgoing.
No.
What do you say?
I said not at all.
Oh, not at all. And in the Hebrew, I think it's even like you see it better with like all the verbs. Like she's quick, she's doing this, and we see, we have it in English here. Two times it says like she quickly did something, quickly emptying. And then, then there's a little talk between the man, meaning the servant, and Rivka, right? Whose daughter are you? And she says, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. And she says, yes, there's plenty of straw and feed at our home and room to spend the night. Okay.
She's not shy about
Right.
speaking to this strange man.
Right, to a strange man, she's not shy. Now, we know that in the Midrash, it says that she was 3, which is something for some reason that sticks in everyone's mind forever. I do not think she was at all 3, because that would be, I think, odd that she would be able to do all this and speak so, so maturely. And also that then she went, the whole thing. There's another Midrash that said she was 14. I assume she could have been 14, she could have been a little older. I assume she was like a young woman of, marriageable age. Just pointing that out because I think, I don't know, in a lot of classes I teach, people always say that. Wasn't she 3? Okay, then in verse 28, we see again like this, the maiden ran and told all of this to her mother's household. And then we don't really hear from her. For a little bit, there's a back and forth discussion between her brother, probably her father, and then Eliezer, Yesum Avram's servant, is going to retell the whole story of what happened. Okay, turn the page to page 36.
What's the stuff about the nose ring and the bands on the sister's arm? Are we supposed to read on verse 30? 24:30? Just a real quick question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, wait, I'm sorry.
Verse 30 says, when he saw the nose ring and the bands on his sister's arms.
Yeah.
It doesn't say what that means. Why is that important?
Oh, I
She had it
actually,
on before when she left the
yeah,
house.
well, he gives her, after she,
Oh, okay.
yeah, she's given these gifts. I actually think that verse is very important.
If you go back, it says it's a gold nose ring weighing half a shekel and 2 gold band for arms, 10 shekels weight. That's expensive stuff.
Yeah, he gives her some expensive jewelry, and then in verse 30, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't think that's super important, but he gives her the jewelry, and then in verse 30, when it says when he saw the nose ring, that he is the brother, her brother Lavan. I actually think that's important because I think it's already foreshadowing, like, which we'll talk about next week with Yaakov and his wives and his family. It's kind of foreshadowing that Lavan was kind of a sneak and kind of a materialistic person.
I had forgotten it was mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
That's what seems kind of like one of the more powerful players in the family instead of the father.
Yes, because it's like him and the father, but I think that's common of like the older brother to kind of have that role as well. Okay, so
I don't know. I think it just occurred to me.
all right, so now we're on page 36, and they say, it's like he retells the whole story, and then you see in verse 51. The family, which you assume the father or the brother, say, here is Rebecca before you take her and go and let her be a wife to your master's son as the Lord has spoken. So they agree. They agree to this match. But yet then, if you notice, and this is the part we often don't remember this detail, in verse 54, so then they drink, they eat, right? It's all agreed. They spend the night. When they arose the next morning, he said, give me leave to go to my master. But her brother and her mother said, let the maiden remain with us some 10 days, and then you can go. And he said, no, don't delay me. I want to go now. And they said, well, let's call the girl and ask for her reply, which is very unusual. And they call her and they say, will you go with this man? And she says, I will. So that's also like all this chapter 24 to me shows these traits, which you've all picked up on about Rebecca. And then they send her off with her nurse, and they go off. We also see just this whole story with the water and we see this boldness, but we also see this trait, like you said, of generosity. And Rivka in some way reminds us, I think, of Abraham with this trait of being very hospitable and kind of running after this trying to be hospitable in like a very active way, and also kind of leaving that whole lech lecha, like here she is making this choice. Ultimately, it was her choice to go and leaving everything behind, and go to this new life, this new kind of unknown. So there's often in rabbinic literature a lot of comparison between Rebecca and Abraham, which makes sense. I think that Abraham would kind of be looking for someone that would fit in to his family and to the values that his family has.
But you think it is rather odd that here these people come out of nowhere and she's being hospitable, and then it's like the next day she's willing to just leave her home and her family. She doesn't get the lech lecha even that Avraham
Right.
got. She's just, you go, mom says, please stay, give her 10 days. She says, no, I'm gonna leave.
Right, although in the Hebrew, it's interesting. That's not gonna be my Hebrew Tanakh too, I'm sorry, what were you saying? Oh.
I mean, no, okay, I shouldn't have interrupted. In those days, it was women, when they reached a certain age, there was a sin that a man would come along and take him.
Right.
And Isaac, with his entourage, seemed like a good deal.
Yes,
So,
definitely.
Yeah,
Yes.
so,
Yes, that's true too. Although so I was gonna say that in the Hebrew, the wording is more like stay a few days or stay 10. Like it sounds like it's unclear how long they're gonna want them to stay. Even though in the English, I always like this seems very logical. Like, oh, what are you leaving in 5 seconds? Like we might not ever see her again, and let's get ready and let's say goodbye. And but I think you're right too. I don't know if that's more maybe a modern sensibility. I go back and forth always when I study Tanakh characters. Like there's my modern sensibility, which says, well, things could have been different then. And maybe like for me, if you showed up at my house and you said, take my child and halfway, whatever, I mean, it's not, and maybe I won't see them again, like I'd want some time. But on the other hand, I'm like, well, it was a very different culture. So maybe it was okay. And right. And I think that's the point. This was a great deal. Well, deal sounds terrible. But yeah, it was
like Levon and was interesting.
That's
Yes.
what I was just thinking.
Maybe things weren't so great at home.
right. So that's another point, which we're gonna
Maybe
see
she
as like
just
a
thought he
theme.
was hot.
She never
Well,
saw
she didn't
him.
know what he looked like.
She's not there.
And I don't think there was a
It's
picture.
the
It's
servant.
only the servant.
Yes, but the fact that he had the servants.
Yeah, so he's
And jewelry.
impressive in terms of like,
And he's
well,
brought her jewelry, he's brought
right,
that's
that's impressive. And they know that, and that is a very key factor in this time period, right? Like, especially for women, right? Who's going to provide for them as they get to be marriageable age, because they go from their father's house to their husband's house.
But the point is also good, what's the first thing we see with Lavan? He's going, where'd you get that jewelry?
Right,
So, maybe Lavan wasn't such,
right, and maybe that's
as
why.
I
like
said,
you
maybe she's looking for a good
Thank you.
reason to get out of there.
Right, and I think that point, like how the Yumi, that she's looking to, right, you said that she's
Yeah,
looking
that's
to
what you
leave. I
said,
think
Carol.
we see that, we'll see that in a lot of the commentary, that Rivka comes, the assumption is that Rivka's home, even though interestingly, Abraham kind of wants to go to that place to get a wife for his son, that the Lavan family, once we know Lavan later on, he is sneaky, he's like a cheat, very into money, and this kind of sneakiness, it seems like the rabbis seem to think, right, is a trait of, I don't know if it's the area or just the family, and maybe she was looking to leave that behind, which I think we will see.
It also makes sense to like compare him being this kind of controlling and person who like wants to get something out of everyone, for her to be this very generous character, because that's probably her responding to having to live with him.
Right, that could be. Okay, so she leaves. All right, next. Now we're going to focus really closely these last few verses when she meets Yitzchak. Okay, verse 62 on the same page. Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Be'er L'chai Roi, where he was settled in that region of the Negev. And Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening, and looking up, he saw camels approaching. Raising her eyes, Rebekah saw Isaac. She alighted, right, unclear in the Hebrew. It could also be she fell, she leaned over, but we're not really going to deal with that, from the camel. And she said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field toward us?" And the servant said, "That is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife. Isaac loved her and thus found comfort after his mother's death. Because there's a few key things
That's the
here.
piece that I don't-
Which I think, okay, number one, well, I don't know which order to go in. It seems like Isaac, now this is a separate issue, which I think will be relevant. It seems like possibly he was not really aware of even what had been going on. Because, or maybe he was, but I think it's important that we see that the Torah does not mention that this arrangement of like, hey, Yitzchak, it's time for you to get married is between Abraham and Yitzchak. It is between Abraham and the servant, and then the servant and Yitzchak. And it could be, I always think this makes sense, that there's a distance and there's some kind of estrangement between Abraham and Yitzchak, possibly because of, like we talked about last week, the Akedah. And if you, I think, right? And remember the commentary that said that maybe Sarah's death was because of the Akedah, because she didn't really know, and then it was so shocking. If we go with that, right, that's like compounding. So that's just one thing to just kind of keep in back in mind. Then we see that very nicely, it says that Isaac loved Rebecca, which we really have very rarely in the Tanakh, that type of emotion, written down. And then we have the reaction. So it seems like, his reaction is he looks up and he sees the camels, which it's also practically, that is what he sees. He sees, like from afar, the camels coming. I don't think he can tell specifically, I guess, who's on them. And she sees like a person. So when she says, "Who is that man?" the servant says, "My master." So in this first commentary, which we're going
Wasn't
to
the
read,
master Abraham and not
he's the master, Yitzchak.
Yitzchak is the master?
I mean, Abram's also the master, but that's who he's clearly referring to. So if she fell off the camel, maybe not, but she definitely, let's say, covers herself up when she knows that it's Yitzchak. So I think just shot-wise, meaning if we don't want to go read into it, we'd say, okay, that's like a custom, that's the manner, or maybe she's like fixing herself up, and that's like she's gonna look nice with her.
Traveling on a camel all day.
Yeah, she's run on a camel. But in this source number one, which I think is really going to use this a little bit of like the premise of the theme, the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, you see from the 19th century, who wrote, his commentary is called the Ha'anek Davar. He thinks, and you see on bold, it just says intimidation. That's really his main point. He says that she fell off the camel out of fear and awe. She didn't know exactly what she feared. There was something about that man, even before she knows who he is, that gives her some kind of awe, fear. And when she hears that this man, right, it's the master, right, he's going to be her husband, she takes a scarf, covers herself up out of reverence and shame, as if she realized she was not worthy of being his wife. From this moment on, intimidation found a permanent place in her heart regarding her husband. Thus you will find that Rivka's relationship with Yitzchak was not like Sarah and Abraham or Rachel with Yaakov, who felt equal to their husbands and never feared to confront them with complaints or criticism. So
Where is he pulling this from? Because
He's pulling it from 19th century patriarchy. That's where he's pulling it.
No. Because Dafka, the relationship between Yitzchak is in my opinion, of all of the fathers and mothers, he's the weak one.
yes,
He's the one he's very passive.
yes.
Things happen to him. He does not take initiative. He's not the intimidating one. And I would question the Netziv why he's saying intimidating. Where is there evidence in the relationship that he's intimidated, that she is intimidated by him?
Okay,
If anything, she's in a position sometimes of more strength.
right, okay.
But
Let me answer that a second. Wait, you're shaking your head, why?
No, I'm agreeing with her.
You're agreeing with her,
The
okay.
picture I see when she gets
Yeah.
off the camel is a strong, tough woman. She takes her leg, she pops it over the camel, she jumps down, and she goes to the servant. Who is that dude? No, I mean,
Okay.
why can't we have a
Right,
woman
all right,
2,000
that's
years
an
ago
interesting
being
read.
aggressive?
Okay, yeah,
Her only, in the way I see it, the only reason she might have to think that Isaac is not a strong man is because he didn't come himself. Maybe if Isaac was a real strong man, he would have come himself, with the servant and gone and picked out the woman, that kind of thing, been there on the spot, rather than accept whoever is brought back for him.
right,
Okay, so in that sense, but nevertheless, she doesn't know, she hasn't met Isaac yet. Maybe he is like Dan, like you guys were saying, a timid kind of guy.
Right.
But she doesn't
Okay.
know that.
Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna, well, I have some suggested answers, but I think you'll see, where do I think he gets it from? So it could be that, 19th century. It could also be that, one is, if you look throughout the text, we will not see, except at the end, like the end of 27, any time that Rivka will speak directly to Yitzchak.
What?
They will never speak directly to each other,
Rivka and
Yitzchak.
really?
Now, of course, I'm assuming they did at some point,
Oh,
but like the
that's
Torah will not record. There was no recorded
That's right.
conversation
right.
between Rivka and Yitzchak, and the parts that we see Rivka, which yes, we have very little, it's not like we have a ton of information, we have what we have, but the parts that we see her acting in the way that we have been introduced to her as like bold and, like kind of strong-willed, she will only do it like behind his back. Like she will never be up front. That's where I think he gets it. And when he says here, like she never, it's not the same. So I'm sorry, I meant to put in the sources, but I'll just recap quickly. If you remember, when Sarah is, has the issue with Hagar, she yells, I think, at Abram and says, right, I'm so angry at you. Hamasi alecha, right? And also, next we'll talk about when Rachel cannot have children, she will also yell at Yaakov and she will say, like, give me children or I'm going to die, right? And we don't see Rivka, who also, we'll talk about in a second, like they have their own issue with children. That's where I think he gets that from. So he wants to say both. He wants to say she's intimidated by no one except him. There's something about him, but yet she's not passive with him. She's just kind of deceptive with him. That's where I think he gets his
really
opinion.
deceptive.
She's very
Later on.
correct, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I think he
That's
gets
the
his
calling
opinion
card.
from. If you look at source 2, wait, do you want to say something? I'm sorry.
No,
Okay,
I'm done.
in source 2, I have a few suggestions why she may have been intimidated by him. So here they are. 2a is the Sforno, who writes, only Yitzchak is truly called Abraham's seed. So there is something about Yitzchak. There are some midrashim that say that he had some kind of like, since the Akedah, he's considered, the
Presence.
right? He had this very spiritual presence because he was, the ultimate like kind of sacrifice. And assuming that she knows about that background, right? His background compared to her background, I think that might be intimidating. He is the covenantal heir to Abraham. And I think she might have found that intimidating. On 2b, I have just, you see that it says he was 40, which we'll look at in the next chapter, right? He is 40 years old when he marries Rivka. I'm assuming she's much younger, although again, I do not think she's 3, but right, she's probably significantly younger than him. Maybe that was intimidating, although maybe not, because I'm sure there were a lot of marriages, I think, with like big age discrepancies in that time period. Okay, that's all I got for that. But I will show you one thing, which is just interesting. Just take it, whatever you like to do with it in 2b, but I like this. If you look at that verse, you see it in Hebrew and in English. It works in both. You see there's the underlined words. So here's the line, which comes from the next chapter. When Yitzchak was 40 years old, he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Lavan, the Aramean. And in Hebrew too, we have that word Arami, Padan Aram, Lavan HaArami. And we all know who Rebekah is because we just met her in the last chapter. So I saw, I don't remember where I saw it, but I liked it, that if you turn around the word, the letters of Arami, you end up with the word, if you see on the bottom there, Aramai, Resh Mem Aleph Yud, which means a cheater. And even though we kind of know this about Lavan, just because as the storyline progresses, that there's this idea that here is Rivka, and she is coming from this background of being in this kind of deceptive, which I think is in her because we see that she will be quite deceptive. And maybe that was very intimidating for her. Like, even though in her own surroundings, she's kind of like a good, nice, generous person, when she comes to Abraham's household, maybe Yitzchak seems just like she, so for some reason, puts him on this pedestal. So that's just a theory. Okay,
You could almost say that she like doesn't want to bother with him, so she just kind of goes behind her back to take care of things.
right, now you can also argue, based kind of what you're saying, you don't want to go with the intimidation route, that, maybe if he's very passive, or if, that he just can't handle the stress.
You could
She
also
just-
say that.
she
You
just-
could also
she
say
just
that's
goes around
because
him.
of-
What?
Could also say that could also be because of like intimidation, like, oh, he's so great, why would I bring this to him?
Yeah, so it could be that,
It could go
or,
either way.
right, it can go either way, because that's kind of how the story plays out. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to, chapter 20. Oh, hold on. 25, oh, that's hold on. Okay, so 25, page 37, verse 19. And we have a little bit, right, we go back to Abraham and his second wife and all that. Then here we go back to our story. This is the story of Yitzchak, son of Abraham. We just read this pasuk. He's 40 years old when he marries her. Okay, turn the page 38. And then Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and the Lord responded to his plea. And his wife, Rebekah, conceived. So here we are, right? We're reading the Torah. We see, here's another couple, and they have the same issue, right? It should jog our memory right away. Abraham and Sarah were barren. And here we have the next covenantal couple, and she's also barren. Yet, also, we should see right away, is very different response. Remember that Abraham kind of, now, we talked about various reasons, and I also think Abraham and Sarah had this issue of not having children for many, many years, even before the Lech Lecha, happened. And they're just kind of starting out, but he will have children when he is 60, so it's 20 years. This is the span of them not having children, but the response is different. Abraham tended to kind of, we thought, like leave Sarah out of it a little bit and leave Sarah behind and not be super sensitive or not sensitive to Sarah. And I think from the text and from the commentaries, we find Yitzchak being sensitive to his wife. So if you look at your sources 2C, 2D, Rashi says, he stood in one corner and prayed while she stood in the other corner and prayed, which I think connects to the idea that maybe they did not communicate directly well, even though they were like kind of, loved each other and on the same page. The Midrash Rabbah writes, which I think is nice, Yitzchak prostrated himself and Rivka also prostrated herself, and he said, Master of the universe, may all the children that you deem to give me be from this righteous woman. And you see also in 2E, the Bechor Shor, who says a similar idea, saying Yitzchak was not concerned. He said, I'm going to have a child because God had promised Abraham that the children are going to come from him. But since he knows the story of what happened with Hagar, he is praying that the children should be from Rivka, which is a very different approach than we saw with Abraham. And it could be, like we often see, I think this is something that still happens today, right? When you see things in your own parents that you do not like or that you disapprove of, I think sometimes you either really try hard and you do something different and you kind of learn from it. Sometimes you just end up doing the same thing because it's just kind of in you, or a little bit of a mix. I'm sure that there's a spectrum of that. So I think that's how I see it here, that he saw what happened with his own, with the whole crazy dynamic that happened with his father, and his mother, and Hagar, and he doesn't want that to happen to him. So that's how the prayer, goes. Even though the Torah does not say what the prayer was at all, it just says that he kind of prayed to God.
I was out for the room for a second. So is that why Isaac didn't have an alternate wife? Is that what you said?
Well, he's saying I'm suggesting that he did not want to have any of that happen,
Right.
because that was such a bad story with his own
There's
parents.
no mention of any other wife
Yeah.
Isaac might never had.
What?
There's no mention of Isaac.
He does not have an alternate wife.
There's no mention of Isaac bearing children with any other woman.
No, right, none. And I think that's the way he wanted. It also says specifically that he loved her, so, all of that together. Okay, then we move on. Okay, so then she gets pregnant, she has, and it says the children struggled in her womb. Verse 22. So I find that this is a very weird part, I think. And definitely I think having to do with the time period, but yet there's this prophecy that's about to happen, and I think it's supposed to be like a true prophecy, not like a heebie-jeebie, like I went to a psychic. It's supposed to be like legit. So she has this struggle in her womb. Unclear. I always think that, maybe it was just that she was having twins and it was very weird. Like feeling was weird, but she goes, it says to inquire of the Lord. Okay, and the Lord answered her. So and you have it also on your sheet here in source number 3. 2 nations are in your womb, 2 separate people shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Okay, so the older shall serve the younger. Now in Hebrew, that last line, Rav Yavod Sa'ir. So if you're familiar with Hebrew, right, Sa'ir definitely always means younger, and I put some notes here for you as well, but we're just going to talk about them. You see, Sa'ir always means younger. So then the opposite, so we see, should be generally like older. But Rav does not really mean older. Usually Rav, like when you say Toda Rabbah, thank you very much, like thank you a lot, it means strong or a lot, powerful. They're not really like, opposites, words that go together. And we see that other times when you look at the notes, there are examples where we do see this word Sa'ir, and then the word for older, which is like the Bechor, or the Bechira in this case, because we have examples from Lot's daughters, right? Lot has these 2 daughters, one is the younger one is the older one. And in Hebrew, it says younger and older, Sira and Bechira. Rachel and Leah, right? Leah is the older one, Rachel is the younger one, and we have that same language, Sira and Bechira. So it could mean, right? Now, we have it translated here, the older shall serve the younger, and I think that is exactly how Rebecca understood it. Which makes sense then of why, right, we kind of all know the general story, that she is going to do everything she can to make sure that Yaakov is going to come in on top, because she feels like she has been told that the older has to serve the younger, meaning the younger one has to be the chosen one, and all that. Yeah.
And are we to presume that she never shares this information?
I think she may not have shared it. Yes. I presume that.
To me, this is a lot like what happened with Abraham. Like he gets this prophecy, that
Right.
he's gonna,
Yes.
and then
It's
all this trouble comes because he's given this piece of information that he's gonna have a mighty people come from him.
Right, and he doesn't share it, and he
Right.
doesn't discuss it, and it's interesting because it's the opposite now, right? It's Abraham is the one who gets the information, and here, like the man, right? And here it's now the woman who's getting the information, and I think she is not sharing it with Yitzchak.
There's another way that could be translated though. It would be like, and the many would serve the younger. So that if perhaps that the firstborn might be more of a multitude than the younger. It doesn't necessarily
Right.
play out in this case, but that would be another way to
Right.
look at the translation.
Right, you could look at it a few different ways. If you see here, it says, see this approach in commentary of the Chizkuni, you can also, so the Chizkuni says that maybe it means Rav Ya'avod Sa'ir, like avod, like la'avod to mean to work, that maybe the younger is going to have to work a lot. And the Chizkuni, that's kind of what he suggests. If you see here, he says, one of these nations would experience a great deal more problems in the course of its history. And that actually is true. Yaakov, although when I thought about it, then it went in a circle, because I said, Yaakov really has a hard life. He has this, he's gonna have to run away, then he has the trouble with his father-in-law, he has trouble with his wives, then he has his daughter Dinah, he has the Yosef story coming up, right? And he has a hard life. He actually says to Paro, when he meets Paro all at the end of his life, Paro says, I think, how old are you? And he says, I forgot how old he is. He says, and I've had such a hard life. So that's true. But then when I thought about it a lot, I said, well, the only reason he has the hard life is like this trigger of the whole thing. But you could understand it that way, because it doesn't say V'rav Ya'avod et Hatzayir.
Right.
If you had the et in there in Hebrew, it would be very clear. So you can also read it like where, like those funny grammar things of where you put the comma and then it changes the whole word. So it could mean the elder shall serve the younger. It could mean the Rav, comma, Ya'avod Sa'ir, the elder, the younger will serve. Now, it's not so important of which way, and we don't really know. But I think what we see from the way the story plays out is that Rivka for sure thinks it means how it's translated here in our Tanakh. and therefore she acts accordingly. But she didn't necessarily have to understand it that way. And I think the point that she did not discuss it, like bounce it off somebody else, she just had kind of, her mindset, and then she goes with that. I just think it's just an interesting thing to note of, the different possibilities. And I guess that's just how we all are, where we understand something our own way. We always say we should discuss with other people, get other people's opinions, especially people we may not agree with on things, and because we all have our own subjectivity all the time. Okay, so that's what she thinks. Then she has the children, the twins. Okay, what do we know about the first one? He is red. This is in verse 25, page 38. He is red, like a hairy mantle all over, so they named him Esau. And now we're gonna just look at these verses and just think kind of like, just if they match up. So it's saying the first one is red and hairy, and they call him Esau. Then his brother comes out, holding on to the heel of Esau, and they call him Yaakov. In Hebrew, each of these names connects to the description, right? They each kind of have a description of what they are like at birth, and then the name comes connected to that. I always find that interesting. It's like they named him Esau. It really sounds like the townspeople. I always feel like they're just like, let's call him Esau, because he is I think Rashi says, I don't think I have that here because it's not really important, but it's just interesting that he was like Asui. He was all ready to go. He looked like a little man. Reminds me of like Baby Boss, but Baby Boss is bald. Like he came out and he was like, because he had hair, he looked old, like a fully formed. He didn't look, I always imagine like, I guess in those times, maybe, if you were very scrawny and babies are all shrivelly, like that was considered not good. And he came out, and I think there's some commentaries that say like hair is considered, it means you're strong. I don't think science behind that is today, but so that's one
They
thing.
just had a story on TV about a kid in China was born with hair that you could put a ponytail on.
And the second brother is Yaakov, because he's holding on to the Akab, to the heel of his brother. Okay, but there's no real judgment in this. Of course, if we looked at, not for tonight, but if you look at, there's always some judgment. Like the commentaries, especially Rashi, he loves to paint Esau as a terrible person from like, I want to say day one, like a little before day one. Like in utero, he's trying to rush out to do idol worship, and even now, right, that's how he's going to paint him. But like just from the psukim, it's just a baby and a baby. It always reminds me of that Free to Be You and Me little sketch. It depends how old everyone is here and if they've heard that, with Mel Brooks. And I used to listen to it when I was little all the time. You're a baby, I'm a baby, and who's a girl and who's a boy?
Mm-hmm.
So it reminds me of that. And then,
Me.
right, did I not say Free to Be You? I don't
You
know.
did say it.
Okay, Isaac was 6 years old. So he's 6 years old, his children are born. Okay, and we have very equal kind of, I feel like just equal descriptions, non-judgmental. Then they grow up. Esau is a hunter. Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors. And Jacob was a mild man who stayed in camp. Also, like pretty equal. This is what they're like, right? They really diverge. They're very different. Esau, you can picture him very outgoing, outdoorsy, risk taker. And there's Yaakov, mild, timid. There's lots of commentary that he was learning Torah all the time. I don't know what he would be learning. Maybe spiritual. But right, so very different brothers. Okay, here we get, and now we should notice this because now comes the part that's really not parallel. Verse 28, Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah favored Jacob. The end. All right, so what's missing?
Why?
Why, right? They eat, and you really expect it. Like, it's really like, okay, so first, like you maybe want to know, what does that mean? He had a taste for game. Like, what is that about? But you're missing Rebecca favored Yaakov, and you expect, just because you have it in the first half, why, and you don't have that. Yeah.
Okay, you said some stuff real fast.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a
So
fast.
Isaac, liking favoring Esau made sense. But, so you're saying, so Rebecca favored Jacob just to even it up, just to even things up?
I don't know. It doesn't say why.
No, I know that, but that's.
Maybe. You're saying that's a suggestion.
It doesn't say the why, I mean.
You're saying maybe
I mean,
that's
what
why
if
there's no why.
What if they had both favored Esau, both favored Jacob? That would have been cool. So I think one had to favor the other. Isn't that the way it is in most, not most, but many houses when there's two children? One parent favors one, the other parent will at least try to
That's not always true.
I mean, I would say in theory, that's not a good plan. But if that's how your household's working, you might want to balance it out that way. Right, but no, but I feel like what you're saying, I think that's a good suggestion, meaning maybe it doesn't tell us why, because she only did it to even it out. And it wasn't the only reason to focus on is the fact that Yitzchak was favoring Esau.
She figured Jacob needed an advocate too, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe because it's a prophecy.
Yes, so that's, okay, so we have a whole bunch of reasons now. Why does one like the other? This is number 4. I'll write you a bunch because I found they're all so fascinating.
Wait, are you skipping over the part, are you skipping over the part now where he comes in and sells in the birthright?
No,
We haven't
now we're
gotten
just
there
doing a little commentary.
Okay.
Then we're gonna get back to the word.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, oh my gosh. Yeah, okay, so, yeah, we'll do it really quickly. All right, so I'm just gonna run through a few of them and you can just.
You know, if you don't cover everything.
Yeah, that's okay.
on-
Yes, I know. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you my favorite one and I'll leave you to the rest. This is my favorite one. I'll give you 2. Okay, number 4C. So 4C says, and I think this will tie in from Rev Hirsch, is that, and you see, is that it's about opposites. Why did one favor the other? Why did one like one and one like the other? Because Yitzchak, we know, is kind of passive, and therefore he sees in Esav what he's not, and maybe what he wants to be and he cannot be, maybe what he thinks the heir to the covenantal throne, so to speak, should be. So that's possibly why. And then we have, and he writes that Esav's lusty, active nature appealed to him and that he perhaps saw in him a force which he had lost. On the other hand, we have Rebecca. She sees in Jacob's whole being a picture of life unfolding, of which in her father's house she had never the remotest idea. Right? Someone who is nice and kind of kind, and if we go with the idea that he's kind of spiritual, right, that's something that is attractive to her. And they each have, meaning they each have their own kind of baggage from their backgrounds, and then they see in their children something that they would like to have, and that's where their each kind of favoritism comes from. Rhoda points out, which I think is true, Rebecca could also, which is the Rashbam's opinion, favoring Yaakov because she feels like it's the prophecy, and that's, I gotta follow it. A fascinating idea, and then we'll move on back into the story, is 4E from Gad Dishi, which is, I'll just summarize it, or that you can read a little bit, is that it's all, when it says Sayid V'fi, right, what is it about the hunting? Like, does he just love meat so much? And he suggests that this trauma, which we kind of talked about briefly last week, from the Akedah, that Yitzchak on the Akedah picture, he's bound up, and when does he know that he's not going to be killed? Not when he smells the meat, right, of the ram, right, being offered up, and he knows it's not going to be me, big sigh, it's going to be this ram instead. And from then on, that was a huge comfort, right? That smell of the meat, and therefore he is always kind of looking for that. I think that's a fascinating approach, and that's what attracted him to Esav, because Esav was someone who could provide that for him. Yeah.
This might be a real stretch, but Rebecca's husband's father, her father-in-law, can be perceived from her perspective as a complete jerk.
A complete what?
A complete jerk, okay? I'm being,
I understand.
yeah. Rebecca saw Abraham as a bad person
Why?
because he tried to kill that. What I'm getting to is that she's projecting exactly the opposite kind of personality onto her son. She's turning him into this super nice, studying kind of guy. I picture Abraham as kind of, he comes into a room and he just starts
Yes, he's a
bumping into
presence.
people. Yeah. Isaac is gonna sit and not do that. So she's kind of making the son, her son, the exact opposite of her father-in-law.
Right, could be, that's interesting. Yeah.
In this state, hunting is a big like father-son bonding.
Can you
thing
speak
also.
louder?
Sure, sorry. Hunting is a big like bonding thing between fathers
Yeah.
and sons.
Right, maybe that.
I don't know.
Okay, all right, moving on. So now we have the famous story of the selling of the birthright. Okay, here we go. We are on page 38. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the open, famished, and Esau said to Jacob, "Give me some of that red stuff to gulp down, for I am famished," which is why he was named Edom. It's another like name for Esau. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "I am at the point of death. What use is my birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." And so he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob then gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and he rose and went away, and thus did Esau spurn the birthright. Okay, so quick question, why do we have this story here? What does this tell us? Yeah.
What I'm about to say, I've mentioned to many rabbis, and none of them buy it, but I think this makes perfect sense. What do you call it, like a Mishnah, in the interpretation? What your husband keeps saying?
The Midrash.
Midrash, yes. I probably should mention to him too, when we get to it. I think that Jacob and Esau grew up as twins, they played together, they were regular rivals, they were the same age, they grew up 10 years, 15 years old, probably about 15 years, and they had a rivalry, an intense rivalry, and they did this, and then if they grew up, Esau started going out, and Jacob started staying in the house, because he was a homebody, and he would come in, and this was a game they played, every day, not every day, but maybe many times. He'd come in, and they act out this little charade, because the birthright meant nothing to either one of them. They left at the birthright.
Okay.
And he said, "I'll give you some food. Now you got to send me birthright. Swear to me." They played the game over and over again. But nobody buys that.
Okay, well, first of all, I don't think nobody buys that,
What?
but nobody, it's not true, because on our source sheet, number 8, we have Rav Sergeant Paul Hirsch. He says a very similar idea. He says, to which must be added that both of them were just still boys, according to the Gemara in Baba Batra, about 15 years old. So that in any case, the Bechorah could only have been sold in boyish
But
bread.
the boys play over and over again.
Right, I mean, it doesn't say over and over again, but I don't, but that's, so there's your, you have a partner in your thought there. He said it was not a real bargain or a serious business deal. But then if you say that, I then wonder, why then do we have it here? What's the point of us, the reader, right, knowing this, this thing that happens between the brothers? Yeah.
Well, it speaks to their personalities and their personal, what is important to them
Right.
as far as family.
Right.
goes.
I think it tells us more about, like, I think that the popular view, and the view I think that we learn often, I don't say it's just when we're little, is that, well, this shows for the next story that Yaakov did nothing wrong. When he kind of steals the blessing from Esau had already given it away, and who cares, right? So let's not blame him and show any fault in Yaakov in the next story. That's, I think, a popular view. I do not agree with that view because a few things. One, I think it's clear that it's not a great story, and the next one. But I also think if you look carefully, I think you see it in the English, you don't even need a Hebrew. This story is about what's called the birthright. The next story is about the blessing. Also different words in Hebrew, right? There's the bechor, right? That's the birthright. And then there's the bracha. Of course, they have like very similar letters in Hebrew, but they don't have to be about the same thing at all. When he says, "Sell me your birthright," okay, so maybe it's some kind of thing that they play with. Some suggest that maybe it's some kind of, so that it is something serious, but it's about an inheritance, right? Sell me your birthright. And then some of the commentaries, just for time, we're going to skip them, but they say that Esau was like, what do I care about my inheritance? I could die any day, right? I go out to hunt, I could be dead tomorrow, and probably I won't outlive my father, and then I won't get any inheritance. And that's what they were like kind of arguing about, maybe. It's just, I think it's more about, Carol said, I think it's more about their traits to show that Esau, although I don't think it is right what happens next with Yaakov and Esau, but that Esau was not really interested in, like, he's not a spiritual person. He's like a on the spot, live life for today guy. And I think that's maybe what this is showing. There's lots of commentary that goes with it, but I want to get to the next part in the last few minutes that we have. So, okay, moving on. All right, so now we have the giving of the blessing. And here, what's interesting is, right, so back to Rebecca and Yitzhak. So this is the whole kind of chapter 27. We have that this whole, this is where I think the lack of communication that we started with comes really into play. So we're on page 40. Yitzhak is old, he called his, and I think he thinks like, I gotta get my stuff together, my affairs in order. He says to his older son, my son, he said, here I am. And he said, I'm old. I don't know how soon when I'm going to die. So take your gear, go out, hunt me some game, prepare a dish like I like, and bring it to me, and I will give you my innermost blessing. Okay, now, here's the last source we have on number 10, right? What is Rivka thinking? And this is where I think we go back to, she did not disclose to him what happened to her when she was pregnant, and now she's not disclosing to him because of whatever, the intimidation, the awe, or maybe she thinks he can't handle it, whatever it is. You see this last source? Rebecca certainly believes that Yitzhak is about to make a decision that will affect the future of the covenant. She certainly believes that Yitzhak is empowered to make that kind of choice, and she certainly believes that the blessing has some kind of special power, like pixie dust, that even if sprinkled on an unintended recipient, will carry the same power and efficacy. In the Abrahamic family, there is no precedent for such a concept, nor do we ever see such a concept again in the Torah. It is eminently possible that this idea is something Rebecca brings with her from Aram, which is a fascinating idea, that she is sure that prophecy was told to her, and that now Yitzhak, because maybe going with the thing that he's this spiritual, amazing person, is going to decide between Esav and Yaakov who's going to be the covenantal heir. But yet we know from the Abraham story, who decides who's the covenantal heir in the Abraham-Sarah story? Remember?
It's God.
God, right? God says, right? No Yishmael, yes to Yitzhak, don't be upset, Abraham, listen to Sarah. So Rebecca, though, this is her opinion. So I think there's also the popular view is that, Yitzhak's fooled, he's going to give the big bracha to the wrong person. But I don't think that's how, he was going to do it at all. Yitzhak, I think, is not, first of all, I don't think he's so, we might think he's so out of it. In this story, he will ask 5 different questions to make sure that it is the right son, right? When he says, on verse, page 41, page 24, page 41, verse 18, he says, Father, which of my sons are you? He says, I'm Esav. And then he says, how did you come back so quickly? Right, there's another question. Oh, God, help me. Come closer so I could feel you. Oh, and then he says, it's weird, right? You sound like Yaakov, your hands are like Esav. But, he goes with it in the end. Are you really my son Esav? I am, right? There's lots of questions. So he's not 100% sure. But yet then he gives him the bracha. But if you take a look, right? So let's assume that he has fooled his father after the 20 questions. Yitzhak has said, okay, this is Esav. Look at the bracha he gives on page 41. You can see it in verse 28. The bracha is really about 2 things, like material wealth, right? May God give you of the dew of heaven and the fat of the earth, abundance of new grain and wine. And then it's about power, right? People will serve you, nations will bow to you, be master over your brothers, but your mother's sons bow to you.
That's a key one.
Right, that's a key one, but it is not about you will inherit the covenant of Abraham, right? That is nowhere in there. And it could be that all along, it's so fascinating and kind of sad to me that maybe Yitzhak was never going to give Esav that bracha, because he saw Esav, and even though he maybe favored him and loved him and the whole thing with wine, maybe with the meat, but he sees he's not fit for that. He's fit for this. And he's not going to give him that bracha, but because Rivka and Yitzhak did not have that communication that they needed to have, and I in this, last week I kind of faulted Abraham, this week I kind of fault Rivka, because Yitzhak, it says he loved her, he says he prayed for her, and it's Rivka who's keeping, I think, things from him and not giving him an opportunity to hear what she has to say, because she has decided what has to be, and then she goes behind his back. And I think another proof of that is you see, skipping Esav's sad outburst when he realizes that when he then gives, so now he has to leave, so now Yaakov has to run away because Esav wants to kill him. And before he leaves, we have the bracha, a blessing on page 43 at the top, that his father gives him. And here it is. He says, may El Shaddai, it starts on the bottom. May El Shaddai bless you, make you fertile and numerous, so that you become an assembly of peoples. May he grant you the blessing of Abraham to you and your offspring, that you may possess the land where you are sojourning, which God assigned to Abraham. That's the covenantal bracha. Nationhood, right? Becoming a great nation, and the land of Israel.
Where are you reading?
I'm sorry, page 43 at the top. It starts 42 all the way at the bottom to 43 at the top. That is the blessing that Yitzchak gives to Yaakov before he has to run away. And that's the blessing of Abraham. That means you're the covenantal heir. So all along, it seems like, if we read closely, it seems like he was not planning to give the wrong bracha to the wrong son. But Rivka did not understand that, because she just even though she's a strong covenantal wife, she has not communicated with Yitzchak. So she has decided it's going to be one way, and this is how things are working out from, all from her perspective. You see, even just as a last point, that even this whole episode where even after the whole thing blows up and Yitzchak knows that Esav was not Esav, right? And that Yaakov tricked him. Still, instead of now them having a big heart to heart, Rivka says to Isaac, this is back on page 42, verse 46. Rivka says to Isaac, I am disgusted with my life because of the Hittite women. Here she's referring to the women that Esav had married. If Jacob marries a Hittite woman like these from among the native women, what good will life be to me? So instead of then saying, okay, I've made a big mess, the boys want to kill each other, well, one wants to kill the other, he's going to have to run away, which is what she says to Yaakov, you have to run to my brother's house. She then turns to her husband and she doesn't tell him that. She says, I really don't like the women, which is a similar thing from Abraham and picking wife. I don't want him to marry someone from here like Esav did. It's going to kill me. We're already upset that Esav married the Hittite women, and that's what we have to send him to my brother. She still can't tell him the truth. So she's going to get what she wants because she is strong, which we saw from the beginning, but she's always going to do it in this sneaky way. And I think we'll see next week that this trait, sneaky trait, is in Yaakov as well, right? Even though we didn't have time to talk about who's at fault and whose idea, who's really doing it. But, just like we see Rivka growing up in Aram, kind of was in her, right? This, just like I think this idea of when you try to rid yourself of traits that you do not like in your family, sometimes you succeed, but sometimes they're just kind of in you and you modify them. We'll see that Yaakov also has this kind of thing. And then, this whole idea of then it kind of comes full circle. Then he's tricked. There's a lot of trickiness and deceptive being deceived that happens in the next generation as well. So that is, I feel like, even though I find these stories fascinating, I always feel bad that I'm here's the forefathers. Every week I will show you how they're a little bit dysfunctional. But yes, I do feel like Yitzchak and Rivka they did love each other, but there was this, this was their dynamic. And unfortunately, I think it became a mess. And just one more thing, there's a fascinating comment, which is not in our book, by Hirsch, who says something which you can just expand on. He says if they would have paid close attention to the boys' natures when they were little, maybe they could have, molded them. It's the whole idea of that they didn't see Esav's true nature, and they could have used that outgoingness and that outdoorsiness, and they could have made him, instead of a hunter, of animals, maybe they could have made him something very outgoing towards God, something of that nature. But I kind of feel like the story could have been so different, if they had communicated. Although, this so it is, and this is how it plays out.
Sounds like a lot of 20th century psychology.
Yeah.
Yes, although, yes, that's true. Although, right, Hirsch in the 9th century. But yes, that's what he kind of says. He does say that, right? Rashi never says things like that. Rashi just Esau was bad, and, Yaakov was good, and that's it. All right, thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night.